Hounds of Tindalos. The Hounds of Tindalos aren't terrifying because of what they do. They're terrifying because of where they come from and what it means the moment they notice you. They don't live in another galaxy. They don't come from some distant dimension we can point to on a map. They inhabit angular hyperspace, a non-Euclidean realm where matter, time, and physical law collapse into rigid, frozen geometry. All biological life exists in curved space, fluid, continuous, safe. The Hounds live in the angles, and those are two completely different universes. Frank Belknap Long introduced them in The Hounds of Tindalos. A man accesses angular space through a chemical formula designed by an ancient Chinese occultist. His mind reaches past timelines. The Hounds notice him. That's the entire mistake. Their form fractures the space around them, hollow proboscises draining not just fluid, but the energetic structures of consciousness itself. And everywhere they pass, blue ectoplasm stains not surfaces, but reality. Corners sharpen unnaturally. Time feels thinner. The air turns brittle. Every sharp angle in existence becomes a potential door. Physical corners, mirror edges, a folded piece of paper. Once they lock onto a target, the hunt spans timelines, reincarnations, even astral states. Time becomes irrelevant. You weren't targeted for trespassing. You were targeted for being seen. Curiosity itself is the crime. The moment you looked into angular space, you stopped being a living being and became a fixed coordinate, a prey object, permanent. There are no spells, no rituals, no protections. The only defense is never to be seen in the first place. Atlach-Nacha. There are entities in this mythos whose horror isn't what they plan to do, it's what they're already doing. Atlach-Nacha has been weaving since before history began. Not destruction, not consumption. Construction, strand by strand, in total silence, over a bottomless abyss deep beneath the surface of the world. And the web is getting closer to finished every single day. Clark Ashton Smith placed it beneath Mount Vormithadreth in Hyperborea. In The Seven Geeses, a human stumbles inside and gets dismissed like a fly in the wrong corner of a web. A crouching form, human-sized, bloated, dense on grotesquely jointed spider limbs. Between those limbs, a face, not arachnid, not fully human, just enough of both to fracture any categorization. Cold, glinting eyes that register your existence as a variable, not a presence. Beneath the mountain, over a bottomless abyss, it weaves, trying to bridge the material world and the dreamlands, two realms designed never to touch. Completion either collapses both worlds or frees Abhoth, imprisoned directly below. Some interpretations suggest it cannot be finished, that Atlach-Nacha is the god of futility, forever building something destined to fail. Or worse, destined to succeed. The web was being woven before the first human drew breath. It will still be moving after the last one stops. Your entire existence is less than a fraction of a single strand. It doesn't hate you. It was simply never aware you were here. Ubbo-Sathla. Ubbo-Sathla doesn't think. It doesn't plan, doesn't pursue, doesn't feel anything even remotely resembling intent. It is a blind biological engine, formless, ancient, pulsating, that predates every living thing this planet has ever produced. And the horror isn't that it exists. The horror is what it means that you exist. The Book of Eibon calls it the unbegotten source. A gray, featureless mass that secretes globs of primitive organic matter, shapeless, twitching proto-life that, through endless iterations of mutation and decay, became everything. Bacteria, reptiles, mammals, you. Not creation in any meaningful sense, a biological accident that never should have happened. Half buried inside this mass are the tablets of the elder gods. Not books, not artifacts, but compressed operational code for biological reality itself. The molecular mechanics of how life arises, mutates, breaks down, and collapses back into the same primordial sludge it came from. They can't be read. The human brain wasn't designed to process the back-end language of the universe. Any attempt ends in the total collapse of identity of thought, of the illusion that consciousness was ever anything more than a brief anomaly in the machinery of flesh. And here's the part that really settles in slow. Everything that emerged from Ubbo-Sathla is programmed to return, not as punishment, not as judgment, simply because that's how the process runs. In the source story, a man pushes his consciousness backward through time and dissolves completely, reabsorbed into the same mass that built him. The real horror isn't being consumed. It's realizing you were never anything more than scaffolding for a process that doesn't know you're here. The machine is still running, still waiting. Yibb-Tstll. Yibb-Tstll is, without exaggeration, the most conceptually devastating entity in this entire video. Not because of what it does, because of what it is. Most entities consume, corrupt, or destroy. Yibb-Tstll does none of those things. Its existence is defined entirely by presence. A presence so overwhelming that simply being perceived by it fractures something in the human mind that cannot be repaired. An immense pulsating mass of black, gelatinous flesh, covered in pendulous appendages, constantly secreting viscous fluid. Around it, an entire ecosystem of night gaunts, tethered like biological peripherals, feeding from it, never truly free. Where its face should be, a glossy dome of clustered yellow eyes. They never blink. They slide independently across the surface, each one tracking a different point in time. One watches a star collapse 1 billion years ago. Another, the final hour of a civilization. Another is watching this exact moment. And when a cosmic boundary is crossed, what comes next has no equivalent anywhere else in this mythology. It releases what the oldest grimoires call the blackness, a snowfall of particles that aren't matter or energy, but a collapse of both. Where they fall, existence ceases. Not just the body, not just the mind, the memory, the causal history, even the future impact of whatever was there permanently erased. The universe forgets how to reconnect its own threads. Those scars don't heal. It isn't a god with desires or intent. It's the act of observation forcibly incarnated, a failsafe written into the substrate of reality itself. Indifferent to everything it monitors, indifferent to everything it erases, including you. It doesn't forgive violations. It doesn't punish them either. It simply remembers. And memory is the most merciless form of judgment the universe has ever devised. Ihrt. When people picture cosmic horror, they imagine something vast, something that reaches across dimensions and rewrites reality at scale. Ihrt is none of those things, and somehow, that makes it worse. Ramsey Campbell's Pale Beast doesn't operate on cosmic scales. Its horror is biological, immediate, and deeply intimate. It doesn't implant madness. It doesn't consume civilizations. It implants larvae directly inside human beings. To Ihrt, we are incubators, living containers. That is the entire relationship. An oval, bloated, translucent mass like coagulated fat or melted wax, supported by thin, insect-like legs that fold without anatomical logic. Across its surface, dozens of eyes emerge, slide, sink back into the flesh, and reappear wherever it needs to look. Sometimes 3 legs carry it, sometimes 9. Sometimes it simply drags itself forward like efficiency is beneath consideration. Its sole function is to locate viable hosts and implant larvae. The process isn't violent in any visible way. The body keeps functioning. The person keeps moving, keeps breathing, keeps existing while something grows inside, using everything they are as raw material. By the time any external sign appears, the process is already irreversible. The horror isn't the larva, it's the framing. To Ihrt, your body is simply a warm container with useful internal conditions. You were never a living being to this entity. You were always just an environment. It doesn't see you as prey, it sees you as infrastructure. You were always just a vessel with a use. Zvilpoggua. Zvilpoggua is the direct offspring of Tsathoggua, the bloated god of apathy and endless consumption, but it inherited none of its father's patience. In the Lovecraftian cosmology, that single difference changes everything. Where Tsathoggua waits dormant, indifferent, letting the universe drift toward it, Zvilpoggua hunts, actively, relentlessly, across dimensions, timelines, and the connective tissue that holds reality together. One waits, one chases. It dwells on Iram, a planet orbiting the star Elul in the Perseus constellation. Less a world than a dimensional sinkhole, where matter thins, time distorts, and the rules governing existence begin to fray at the edges. Armless, winged, toad-like, standing on 2 skeletal legs with a grotesquely elongated, rubbery neck. Where a head should be, a mass of writhing cephalopodic tentacles. Extra-dimensional structures capable of reaching across reality's barriers to siphon memories, temporal continuity, and fragments of identity itself. When it descends on a world, it doesn't leave bodies, it leaves gaps, places where the universe forgets itself. Time bends, identities collapse, reality fractures at the seams. Indigenous cultures in northeastern America described it independently as Uataqua, zero, connection to the mythos, because wherever it passes, the psychic scar echoes through generations, through genetics, through myth. But the gaps aren't even the most disturbing part of what this entity represents. This isn't the madness of Nyarlathotep or the blind chaos of Azathoth. This is the horror of being consumed by something that doesn't recognize your right to exist, something that eats not just what you are, but what you ever were. It doesn't end lives, it erases the evidence those lives ever occurred. Rhan-Tegoth. Rhan-Tegoth shouldn't exist by any rule of biology, physics, or coherent design. It isn't a god with purpose or a predator with strategy. It's a biological accumulation, a mistake compiled over eons that somehow achieved a terrible, sustained stability. Some forbidden texts suggest it was manufactured by Tsathoggua, not through intention, but as an accidental byproduct of compressing water, temporal distortion, and raw, chaotic matter into a semi-coherent form. Parts of it bleed into other dimensions. Parts belong to entirely different timelines. Simply being near it can shred reality like wet paper. A bloated mass of flesh covered in pulsating suction cup tendrils. 6 monstrous limbs ending in jagged black pincers. An elongated proboscis hanging between clusters of swollen gills. 3 cold, fish-like eyes drifting without visible awareness. Its body doesn't look designed, it looks accumulated. Like something kept adding material for 1,000,000 years and never once stopped to ask whether any of it made sense. It sat on an ivory throne in the Arctic, once worshipped by the Migo through flesh offerings. A taxidermist named George Rogers transported it to London, planning to feed it, worship it, gain power from it. Classic mistake. Rhan-Tegoth ate him immediately. Friends, enemies, acolytes, strangers, there is no category it registers beyond the fact that you contain calories. No recognition, no loyalty, no distinction whatsoever. You cannot build loyalty inside something with no mechanism for recognizing the concept. And if you think you'd approach it differently, every single person who stood before Rhan-Tegoth and believed that exact thing became food. It hibernates across millennia, but when something pokes it just enough, the feeding starts again. It always starts again. Abhoth. Every entity in this mythology has a function, a hunt, a web, a boundary. Abhoth has none. It simply produces blindly, endlessly, without purpose, and that absence of function is the most disturbing thing this entire mythos contains. Called the source of uncleanliness, it exists inside the cavern of archetypes, not a cave, but a biomechanical womb, where the universe brute forces matter into temporary forms with no plan, no goal, no intended outcome. Creation and decay are the same process. Success and failure are indistinguishable. A sprawling, gelatinous mass of gray flesh, its surface crawling with retractable sensory tendrils, not out of curiosity, but pure reflex. Scattered across this bulk, blinking eyes, twitching mandibles, half-formed limbs, a leg forms, then an eye, then a proboscis lined with teeth. The organism births malformed life and reabsorbs it within seconds. But sometimes, something escapes. And that is where the contamination begins. These fragments, what occult texts call the seeds of Abhoth, embed into ecosystems, mutate, hybridize, and occasionally produce species that should never exist. Some heretical theories suggest entire branches of terrestrial evolution traced directly to something that slithered out of this cavern millions of years ago. For every viable organism, 1,000 failures. Broken, screaming, temporary. You are one of the viable ones, so far. The machinery doesn't notice. It simply outputs again. You didn't crawl out of nothing. You crawled out of Abhoth. And one day, everything returns. Bokrug. Bokrug is the most unsettling entity in this entire video, not because it fractures reality, not because it seeds biological horror across generations, because it operates on a principle that no other entity here uses: fairness. Not the blind production of Abhoth, not the cosmic indifference of Yibb-Tstll. Bokrug embodies balance, brutal, absolute, and patient beyond any human definition of the word. And in a universe of total indifference, The existence of a reckoning is somehow more terrifying than chaos ever was. It was worshipped by the Thumha of Yibb, amphibious beings who offered nothing but quiet water rituals. No blood, no dark invocations. Then, Sarnath, a nearby human city, destroyed Yibb completely, massacred its people, desecrated its temples, stole the jade idol of Bokrug as a trophy of their superiority. Bokrug waited. For 1,000 years, Sarnath flourished, its buildings growing grander, its wealth multiplying beyond imagination. Every single year they celebrated the destruction of Yibb until the 1,000th anniversary. On that night, something stirred in the lake. When the sun rose, the city of Sarnath was gone. No ruins, no screams, no bodies, just a vast, empty space where one of the greatest civilizations in the Dreamlands had stood. The jade idol returned to the water, renewed, as though Sarnath had never existed at all. Some scholars call this cosmic immune response. Not moral justice, not vengeance, just the Dreamlands correcting an imbalance in its own ecosystem, the universe resetting what was broken. In the Dreamlands, the gods don't forget. They don't need to hurry, and neither does the water.
Subscribe for more interesting stuff. Tell us your experience in the comments.